Welcome back to another explainer. We spend a lot of time taking complex, ancient texts and trying to break them down to find the real, practical wisdom hidden inside. Well, today, we're diving straight into a profound philosophical argument from our ancient source material. We're unpacking Yudhishthira's absolutely passionate defense of virtue against a wave of skepticism. It's this brilliant exploration of duty, faith, and really, the core motivation behind why we do good in the world. So, let's get into it. To really grasp Yudhishthira's argument, we first need to understand the conflict he's dealing with. He's actually responding to Yajaseni, who's also referred to in our source text as Krishna or the daughter of Draupadi. Now, Yajaseni has just presented a deeply skeptical but honestly a totally relatable argument. It's the ultimate human dilemma, right? Why should we bother doing the right thing if we don't see an immediate reward? I mean, if being virtuous doesn't visibly pay off right away, is it actually worth all the effort? She's questioning the very purpose of acting morally in a world that, let's face it, often seems completely indifferent. But Yudhishthira, he completely flips the script on her. He draws this incredibly sharp contrast between virtue as a duty and virtue as a transaction. He just plainly states that he acts virtuously, gives to charity, and performs sacrifices simply because it is his duty to do so. That's it. He tells her, I never act solicitous of the fruits of my actions. In other words, he isn't soliciting a payoff. He acts virtuously to uphold the ancient ordinances of the Vedas and to mirror the conduct of the good and wise. He's definitely not doing it because he expects some sort of cosmic paycheck at the end of the day. Which brings us to section 1, the traitor in virtue. I have to say, I absolutely love this quote from the text. The man who wisheth to reap the fruits of virtue is a traitor in virtue. Yudhishthira leans heavily into this powerful, almost biting metaphor. Think about it. If you're only doing good deeds because you're calculating the return on investment, well, you aren't truly virtuous. You're basically just a merchant bartering with the universe. Yudhishthira considers this transactional mindset to be mean, and he firmly states that anyone operating like this should never be counted amongst the genuinely virtuous. So, the crucial point here is this. It's not just about your intention, it's about the actual consequence of that intention. Crucially, a traitor in virtue is plagued by doubt. When a person performs a good act but is constantly doubting and stressing about whether they're going to get the reward, that very skepticism actually prevents them from obtaining the fruits of their actions. The doubt itself is destructive. It literally hollows out the good deed from the inside. Let's move on to section 2, the danger of doubt. Here, Yudhishthira escalates his argument by setting up this fascinating contrast between the fool and the wise. On one side, you've got the person who relies entirely on their own limited reasoning and what they can physically observe. Yudhishthira calls this person a foolish wretch. On the flip side, you have the wise, and he gives this beautiful example. He says an intelligent child, born of a good race, who studies the Vedas and behaves virtuously, is actually regarded by royal sages as an aged sage. It doesn't matter how young they are chronologically, because wisdom isn't about age. It's about anchoring yourself in universal truths rather than just fleeting physical evidence. And this brings us to exactly why relying only on the senses is such a massive trap. Just listen to this quote. The fool regardeth only the external world capable of gratifying his senses, and is blind to everything else. When a person doubts religion out of lust or covetousness, mostly because they just want immediate physical gratification, they get trapped. Yudhishthira explains that this miserable wretch becomes full of anxiety and completely cuts themselves off from regions of immortality and eternal bliss. They are literally trading eternity for whatever happens to be right in front of their nose. The stakes he lays out here are remarkably high. Yudhishthira argues that a person who willfully rejects proofs, who slanders the interpretations of the scriptures, has no expiation for their offense. There's no easy way back from that. He warns that the man who doubts virtue is destined to take his birth in the brute species. In fact, he says the sinful wretch who transgresses the scriptures is regarded as lower even than robbers. It's just a total spiritual freefall. Now, section 3, the proof of the sages. Yudhishthira doesn't just offer warnings, though. He drops an overwhelming weight of historical and spiritual proof. And this brilliantly illustrates his point. Look at this list of legendary figures from the source text. You've got Markandeya, who acquired immortality in the flesh through virtue alone. Then there's Vyasa, Vasishta, Maitreya, Narada, Lomasa, Sukha. Yudhishthira reminds his listener that she has seen these great ascetics with her very own eyes. These are Rishis who, by virtue alone, became pure souls with celestial prowess, superior even to the gods. They stand as living, breathing proof that virtue yields immense spiritual power, even if it isn't the material wealth a trader might be looking for. To really cement this idea, he uses a metaphor that completely turns the whole merchant concept on its head. He says, "Religion is the only raft for those desirous of going to heaven, like a ship to merchants desirous of crossing the ocean." He takes the imagery of merchants, people dealing in commerce and trade, and applies it directly to the spiritual journey. Just as a merchant absolutely needs a sturdy ship to navigate a treacherous, massive ocean, a human being needs religion and virtue as their essential vehicle to navigate existence and reach heaven. Without the raft, you're going to sink. All right, moving into section 4, a world without virtue. Let's shift our focus from the individual to society at large and explore this really compelling what-if scenario. What happens to the world if we all just decide virtue is pointless? I want you to really think about this, because the picture he paints is incredibly stark. Imagine a world where every single act of goodness is universally deemed fruitless. If asceticism, charity, and honesty had no outcome, no one would pursue salvation. No one would even bother acquiring knowledge or wealth. Humanity would strip away everything that elevates us, and men would devolve to live entirely like beasts. The text describes this hypothetical universe as being enveloped in a dire, infamous darkness and confusion. It would be a complete and utter collapse of the social and spiritual order. He follows up this dark vision with a brilliant rhetorical question for his audience. If acts were truly all fruitless, would men have practiced virtue generation after generation? I mean, really, the very continuation of human tradition, the fact that society hasn't collapsed into that infamous darkness, is Yudhishthira's proof that there is a cosmic order. God, or the supreme being, is the giver of fruits. The endurance of virtue across generations is the living evidence of its underlying truth. And that brings us to section 5, the mystery of rewards. This leads us into our final theme, where Yudhishthira zooms way out to the cosmic scale to address the ultimate, unseeable nature of divine justice. But before going totally cosmic, he brings it right back home. He tells Yajni Seni to look at her own life. He points to the miraculous circumstances of her own birth and the birth of Drishtadajamna. He asks her to consider the actions of beings independent of human conditions, the gods, Gandharvas, and Rakshasas, who all cherish virtue. He uses her own tangible family history as undeniable evidence that virtue and vice cannot be fruitless. The proof is right there in her own existence. But, and this is a massive but, we cannot always expect to understand the timeline. The ultimate truth, as laid out in the text, is that the origin and destruction of acts are mysterious even to the gods. Ordinary, ignorant men demand immediate, easily digestible proof. But the regenerate ones, those who have destroyed their material aspirations and burnt away their sins, they understand this grand illusion. They possess a profound peace and holiness that allows them to accept the mystery without demanding a receipt for every good deed. Which brings us to his ultimate conclusion. Therefore, though you mayst not see the fruits of virtue, thou shouldst not yet doubt religion or gods. Yudhishthira is pleading with her, and by extension all of us, to let our doubt be dispelled like mist. Even when we are standing in the dark, even when the payoff is entirely invisible to our limited human senses, we have to replace our skepticism with faith and continue to perform our duties with a willing heart. And that leaves us with this final, timeless question to reflect on. Will you perform good acts simply because it's your duty, even if the reward remains hidden in the mist? Yudhishthira's defense isn't just an argument against an ancient skeptic. It is a direct challenge to our modern, transactional minds. It asks us to elevate our motivations, to act without demanding visible proof, and to truly trust in the eternal nature of virtue. Think about what kind of world we could build if we stopped trading in virtue and started simply living it. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.